Good afternoon. Welcome to This Week in Turkey. Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, the leader of the main opposition, Republican People's Party, CHP, was attacked by a mob at a soldier's funeral in Ankara on Sunday.
A mob attacked the main opposition, Republican People's Party, CHP leader during the funeral of a fallen Turkish soldier in Ankara. The group chanted slogans against the PKK before attacking Kılıçdaroğlu at the funeral of Private Yener Kırıkçı, who was among the soldiers killed in the clashes with the PKK on the Turkish-Iraqi border on April 19th. Camera footage showed the mob trying to punch and kick the CHP leader. A video of the incident showed Kılıçdaroğlu hit on the head at least twice as a clutch of security guards attempted to keep dozens of shouting and fist-pumping men away. Kılıçdaroğlu was later taken to a house by security members to avoid any further attacks. The group then gathered outside the house chanting PKK out and was forced to disperse by security officials. Kılıçdaroğlu was removed from the house by armored vehicle nearly 1 hour later. In a speech later outside his party's headquarters, Kılıçdaroğlu said that the attack had targeted Turkey's unity. The assailants have no respect for the martyr. They are not genuine Muslims, he said, adding that the incident would not deter him from defending law and justice. They don't want me to go to our martyrs' funerals. They think I will step back if they attack me. I will not even take one step back, Kılıçdaroğlu added. After the attack, 9 suspects, including a woman, were taken into custody for throwing stones at the official car of Kılıçdaroğlu during the funeral. 8 of the suspects were later released, while the detention period of Osman Sarıgün, who punched Kılıçdaroğlu in the face, was prolonged. Later on Tuesday, the suspect was released under judicial control. Meanwhile, the CHP requested a parliamentary inquiry to clarify the incidents in all aspects, to investigate the security and intelligence vulnerabilities, and to hold those responsible accountable. The inquiry into the incident read that the lynch attempt during the funeral of the martyred soldier was a premeditated attack.
The legal battle regarding the results of the local elections continues. The Supreme Board of Elections has declined a request from the ruling Justice and Development Party, AKP, to disenfranchise civil servants who were dismissed with decree laws following the July 2016 coup attempt.
Istanbul's new mayor, Ekrem İmamoğlu, promised on Sunday to include the city's people in the process of running the country's biggest city. A mentality of new generation citizenship is coming to Istanbul, İmamoğlu said at a rally to celebrate a new beginning, urging people to unite after he won a highly contested race against the ruling party candidate and former Prime Minister Binali Yıldırım. In parallel with the expansion of participation mechanisms, the citizens will be provided equal access to information technologies, İmamoğlu said during the rally in Maltepe on the Asian side of the city. İmamoğlu said gigantic but inhumane projects will be no more in his era, as a new generation of municipalism will begin. The new mayor has vowed to serve all citizens of the 16 million-strong city, regardless of their political inclinations. We are united now. The whole of Istanbul is meeting in Maltepe for a new beginning, İmamoğlu said. İmamoğlu, who will govern the city for the next 5 years, said the Maltepe rally was not a political gathering, but a way to introduce the city's new administration to the people of Istanbul. I want you to know that a new beginning is very valuable, he said. The coming 5 years is not only 5 years for the mayor, but also for 16 million people. Meanwhile, the legal battle regarding the results of the election continues. Turkey's Supreme Election Board, YSK, has declined a request from the ruling AKP to disenfranchise civil servants who were dismissed with decree laws in the wake of the July 2016 coup attempt. The ruling came during a meeting of the YSK on Tuesday at its Ankara headquarters to evaluate appeals made by the AKP and its election ally, MHP, regarding the March 31st local elections. The AKP, in its appeal, argued that the votes of approximately 15,000 former civil servants who were dismissed from their public posts should not have counted in the Istanbul elections because they were ineligible to vote. The AKP's appeal drew criticism from the main opposition CHP at the time because there is no law in Turkey that bans fired civil servants from exercising their constitutional right to vote. While the YSK dismissed that particular appeal by the AKP, the Electoral Board said they will consider 2 other AKP appeals concerning some balloting committee chair people and members and the claim that 41,000 ineligible voters were allowed to cast votes in the elections. The Supreme Electoral Board is expected to put an end to the legal debate by the end of this week.
In a written statement on Facebook, former Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoğlu harshly criticized the ruling AKP on Monday, blaming policy changes and its alliance with the nationalist MHP for its poor performance in the March 31st local elections.
Ahmet Davutoğlu, a former prime minister and former close advisor to President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, blamed a narrow and greedy group within the ruling Justice and Development Party (AKP) for its poor performance in the March 31st local elections, as well as current state of polarization in Turkey. Davutoğlu, who had quit in May 2016 due to the pressure he faced from Erdogan, released a 15-page statement on his Facebook page on Monday and strongly criticized the party and its leader without mentioning his name. In his first major public challenge to Erdogan since leaving office 3 years ago, Ahmet Davutoğlu slammed the party's economic policies, media restrictions, and the damage he said it had done to the separation of powers and institutions. Davutoğlu said that the fact that the president is taking a side in the election disengages the office from at least half of the country. The former prime minister also wrote that, under the current circumstances, the practice of a partisan presidency system should be re-evaluated, and the problems stemming from this situation should be tackled. Davutoğlu said the party's reformist, liberal ethos had been replaced in recent years by a more statist, security-based approach that was driven by concerns about preserving the status quo. He also said that recent economic policy decisions showed a move away from free market principles, and that scaring global investors who are necessary for the development of the country is a dead end. After Davutoğlu's harsh criticism of the ruling party, an academic speech scheduled to be delivered by his wife, Sağda Davutoğlu, a medical doctor, was cancelled on Wednesday without explanation.
Joining us via Skype today is Soner Çağaptay, who is the director of the Turkish program at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, and we'll be talking about the latest regarding the ruling AKP after the March 31st mayoral elections. Good afternoon, Mr. Çağaptay. Welcome to This Week in Turkey.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
So as you've probably followed yourself very closely, a widespread conclusion after the March 31st local elections is that a deep divide is currently running through the ruling Justice and Development Party. What do you think? How serious is this divide, and who are the main actors?
I think that there are definitely divides within AKP, such as those within the palace, where President Erdogan runs Turkey. From various factions within the party, we have seen former Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoğlu issue a manifesto. But I think what really matters is the recognition that Recep Tayyip Erdogan is still the most powerful politician in Turkey. And the question is, what has happened to Recep Tayyip Erdogan? When he came to power in 2003 through AKP, whether or not you agreed with Erdogan is then in the change of face of change in Turkey. He had a forward-looking vision. Not everybody agreed with it, but most people embraced it because he was the only forward-looking politician. 16 years forward, today, I think the problem for Erdogan is not necessarily whether he will hold his party together, it is whether he will come to face of change again. And for that, he has to embrace a forward-looking vision, but it's really hard because he has ran Turkey for nearly 2 decades. When he came to power, he suggested that he could fix Turkey's problems from corruption to the Kurdish issue to lack of democratic freedoms. Now he owns all those problems, from economic collapse, unfortunately, to the Kurdish problem, to the lack of democratic freedoms. So it's hard, in my view, for Erdogan to make a convincing case that he is going to change Turkey, because then the electorate will say, well, what have you done in the last 17 years? So in this juncture, I think the question is not so much Erdogan keeping various actions in place. It is where everyone is able to reinvent himself.
These elections, as you know, just like the previous ones, were won between alliances, namely the People's Alliance and the Nation Alliance. And judging by the latest developments, including the mob attack against CHP leader Kılıçdaroğlu, and also the AKP's efforts to annul the result of the March 31st local elections, would you say that the AKP's People's Alliance with the nationalist MHP is over?
Probably not. I would say that Recep Tayyip Erdogan, Turkey's president, makes few mistakes. I think that if he were to admit a few mistakes that he has committed or made, the first one is kind of related to our conversation, but on the foreign policy realm, how he has put Turkey in the unenviable position of having to choose either Russia or the United States regarding Ankara's decision to purchase Russian-made S-400 missiles. There's no way Erdogan can walk out of this without offending either Moscow or Washington or both. So clearly no good scenario. I think that's probably one error Erdogan believes that he should have never committed. And the second one on the domestic side is in response to your question, this change to the Turkish constitution, which created an executive-style presidential system, prior to which, because Turkey was a multi-party democracy, Erdogan's AKP could easily obtain legislative majority and form the country's government with as little as a third of the popular vote. This is how they got to power in 2002, when the AKP won election with only 34% popular vote, which gave them both a legislative majority as well as the mandate to form government because of the multi-party nature of the country. That is now gone. And that is gone because Erdogan eliminated that system by changing the constitution, creating a presidential system where he needs to get 50% of to become president. And I think that has forced him into coalition with Nationalist Action Party, MHP. At this stage, because his party alone, AKP alone, will not get Erdogan %, he needs MHP more than the MHP needs him. So I think if Erdogan wakes up in the morning and says, what two things I should have never done? One is probably committing to buy S-400s from Russia. The second is changing the system to this presidential format where he needs more than 50% of the vote. That is his biggest challenge. It's easy for him to get 35 and 30%. He's done this nearly a half a dozen times in the last 15 years, but it's nearly impossible for, I would say it's impossible for him to get 50% without MHP. So that makes MHP indispensable, whether or not Erdogan likes it.
Mr. Çağaptay, as you've just mentioned yourself, former Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoğlu has issued a 15-page long statement on Facebook in which he harshly criticized the current policies of the AKP and its poor performance in the March 31st local elections. What do you think about this statement? Is this a manifesto of sorts?
I think it is, but maybe a day too late, buck too short, as we say in English, in the sense that Davutoğlu, when he was Prime Minister, I think witnessed some of these developments that he's criticizing. And it would have been much more powerful for him to speak up at that time. He's an ex-prime minister, I think, in Turkey right now, and there's very little media attention devoted to him. Unfortunately, as a result of developments that took place under his clock, where a large part of Turkey's media folded under the government, and now Davutoğlu is finding himself very hard to get his message because of the fact that the media that he watched fold under the government is now even not giving him space. So having said this, of course, two wrongs don't make a right. I think Davutoğlu has a point. His point is that he does need to improve on its democratic environment and freedom of expression. But I doubt that this really has any legs because I think that we need to understand the gravitas of Turkish President Erdogan in Turkish society to respond to the question of how far Davutoğlu's manifesto will go. Erdogan is completely a polarizing political figure, but is also very much of a loved figure. The party's base adores him. That's nearly easily 40% of Turkish electorate that thinks that he can do something wrong. And the other half of the country, though they don't like him, many fear him. And I would say even some in the base fear him, as well as liking him. So it's hard, I think, for someone from within AKP to believe and think that they could take away the party's base from Erdogan because of the fact that the base either loves Erdogan or loves Erdogan and fears him at the same time. And I think it's very unlikely that there will be significant voter splinters to go with Davutoğlu, his well-meaning but a very late manifesto notwithstanding.
And what's your take on the new party allegations?
Again, I would say it's a step further. People have been talking about maybe former finance minister Babacan or economy minister Babacan and former President Gül, both AKP members who have fallen out of grace, and former Prime Minister and previously Foreign Minister Davutoğlu establishing a party. I would say I will believe it when I see it, that this party will have its legs. It will be very hard for this party to carve space in terms of public debate, whether from media or in terms of support from the business community to find their legs. And I think that right now it's really difficult to speak of challenge to Erdogan from within AKP because he remains a quite powerful political figure over the party's base.
Finally, Mr. Çağaptay, as you know, President Erdogan has recently called on 82 million Turks to put aside all of their differences and unite on those issues which concern the country's future. Erdogan further proposed a Turkey alliance rather than a people's alliance or a nation alliance. How likely is this? How likely is the idea of a Turkey alliance, in your opinion, at this stage?
I wish it was, because it would suggest that Turkey's polarized political landscape is no more. But unfortunately, that's not how I am seeing post-local election developments evolve. Turkish President Erdogan obviously is the most consequential Turkish politician of the 21st century, and perhaps of the entire last century since Turkey was founded by Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. Erdogan is consequential because he has transformed Turkey, both economically and politically. The economic story is a very good, positive, successful one. He has lifted people out of poverty. When he came to power in 2003, Turkey was a country of mostly poor people. Now it's a country of mostly middle-income people. That's Erdogan's bright side. Economic growth, despite the slowness of the economy in the last year, I think it's quite a bright story. But there's also a dark and illiberal side to Erdogan's legacy. He has demonized, brutalized, and cracked down on demographics that are unwilling to vote for him. So while he has a base of committed followers, many conservatives, many of whom he lifted out of poverty, which adores him, also Erdogan opposition, which loads him, constituted by groups, disparate groups of liberals and leftists and secularists and Kurdish nationalists and Alevis and others, who despise him because he demonized, brutalized, and cracked down on those demographics. I think that this suggestion by the president to form a Turkey alliance intends or implies Erdogan is going to be no more a polarizing figure and is going to be embracing not just the half of the country that loves him, but also the other half of the country that feels disempowered and disenfranchised by Erdogan. Unfortunately, post-election environment does not suggest that this is coming forward. We've seen attack on the main opposition leader, what looks like a lynch effort that went mostly unpunished, in my view, as well as other attempts at political violence that are completely unfortunate. So I don't think at this stage we are really looking at a country that is moving forward from this period of polarization. When it does happen, though, I think this is will be incredibly fresh, it will be paving a new path for Turkey, because Turkey has so much positive energy that it could use were it to move beyond its perennial split between pro and anti-Erdogan camps. And that would actually make Erdogan go in history as a leader who not only transformed Turkey economically, but also politically, if he were to bring forward an era of political polarization.
Thank you, Soner Çağaptay, for joining our show today.
Thank you.
Today, we were joined by Soner Çağaptay from the Washington Institute, who commented on the latest debates on the AKP after the local elections. And now we'll continue with our next news video. Thousands marched in the streets of Istanbul on Wednesday night after the reported rape of a 7-year-old child in the Küçükçekmece district of Istanbul.
A 5-year-old girl was found by her family in a pool of blood outside her home on Monday, media reported this week. The girl was taken to hospital and is still receiving treatment, according to reports. Another girl, aged 7, was targeted in her home in the district of Küçükçekmece on Wednesday. The attacker entered the home when the girl's mother left to buy bread, but fled when the girl screamed as he attempted to remove her clothes, according to a report by Cumhuriyet. Marches and protests were held around the city on Wednesday night, with women's groups coming out in force to demand action against sex offenders. Further protests took place in the provinces of Muğla, Adana and Eskişehir, in Cyprus, and in the districts of Eyüp, Sancaktepe, İkitelli, and Şirinevler in Istanbul. The residents of Kanarya neighborhood, where the 5-year-old girl was abused in Küçükçekmece, took to the streets for protests again. Police intervened in the protest by using anti-riot water cannon vehicles and pressurized water. The ruling Justice and Development Party, AKP, has also spoken out against the attack on Monday. The Ministry of Family, Labor and Social Services released a statement promising to provide support to the victim and her family, while the Istanbul governorate strongly condemned the attack in a statement on Wednesday. The governorship, however, warned that fake news about the attack had been spread via social media and said some circles had attempted to use the incident to provoke social chaos. The governorship also announced that a legal action would be taken against the ones who used the incident for provocation. Speaking about the incident, Interior Minister Süleyman Soylu has stated that the perpetrator has been caught. Later in the evening, Istanbul's new mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu visited the family and made a short speech to the protesters. Promising to follow the incident, he said, "I just wanted to share this moment with you. We are on your side. We are on the side of our children."
Reuters reported this week that Goldman Sachs is currently in talks to buy restructured Turkish loans.
Goldman Sachs is in talks with Turkish banks and companies to buy large distressed loans following a wave of corporate restructurings in the country last year, according to Reuters. The sources, who spoke to Reuters and requested anonymity, did not specify the size of the restructured loans, but said Goldman was looking at those valued in the range of $2 billion to $6 billion. The sources commented that Turkish banks might be willing to sell credits to strengthen their balance sheets and liquidity needs. One source suggested that Goldman Sachs and some large banks in London were intensively discussing restructuring Turkish loans. Since Turkey's currency crisis last year, where the lira halved in value at one stage, companies constrained by the currency weakness have sought to restructure their debts. The weaker lira, which has fallen another 10% this year, has made it difficult for Turkish companies to service foreign currency debts. Restructured loans make up more than 100 billion liras of the loans in Turkey's banking sector, which total 2.5 trillion lira, Finance Ministry data showed. As part of a reform plan announced this month by Turkish Finance Minister Berat Albayrak, loans in the energy and construction sector would be taken off banks' balance sheets. The Treasury will also issue 5-year debt instruments worth a total of 3.7 billion euros to strengthen the capital of state banks, it said on Monday. In the meantime, the Central Bank of Turkey kept its one-week repo rate constant at 24%. Recently released data show that the rebalancing trend in the economy has continued, the bank said yesterday. The decision came in a statement from the bank's Monetary Policy Committee meeting, the third of 8 meetings scheduled for 2019. In 2018, the bank held 9 Monetary Policy Committee meetings, as interest rates climbed from 8% to 24% over the course of the year.
Moscow Times columnist Vladimir Frolov wrote an op-ed last week in which he claimed that Russia is on the verge of a victory over NATO and the United States thanks to Russian President Putin's cooperation with Erdogan.
In his article titled "Our Man in NATO, Why Putin Locked Out with Erdogan," Moscow Times columnist Vladimir Frolov wrote on April 15th that Russia is on the verge of a victory over NATO and the United States. Without firing a single shot, deploying a single tank, or using a single internet troll, Moscow can soon destroy the unity of NATO by removing a key country from its military network. What's more, Russia will receive $2.5 billion for its efforts, and not a single new sanction. This is a victory that was unimaginable only a few years ago. I am talking, of course, about Turkish President Recep Erdogan's decision to purchase the Russian S-400 air defense system. The US has tried to block the deal ever since Moscow and Ankara announced it in December 2017, initially claiming that the system was incompatible with the NATO air defense systems. It turns out, however, that NATO missiles can be fitted to the S-400s. But Washington soon put forward its main argument, namely that the S-400 is incompatible with the United States' newest 5th-generation F-35 fighter jet that should serve as the main aircraft of the NATO Air Force. That news triggered a slow train wreck in the US-Turkish relations. Turkey is meant to receive more than 100 F-35s by 2023 as replacements for its outdated F-16 aircraft. What is more, an F-35 engine maintenance center is being set up in Turkey to serve the European region. Participation in the entire program with the US would have brought the Turkish military-industrial complex $12 billion, more than offsetting the $9 to $10 billion price tag for Turkey's new batch of jets. The country has already invested $1.25 billion in the F-35 program. For the US, Turkey's role in the production of the F-35 created a powerful ecosystem of influence on Ankara's policy and support for Washington's leadership in the alliance. That honeymoon might soon be over, Frolov wrote in his Moscow Times column.
That's all from This Week in Turkey. Thanks for tuning in and hope to see you again next Friday at 5 p.m. Goodbye.